Welcome back, Wanderer, to another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Today, I'm joined again by Crowe Whitney, and we're going to dive deeper into 4 more of the lenses from the art of game design, carrying on with the series on the textbook by Jesse Schell. Specifically, we're going to explore the lenses of actions, goals, rules, and skill, and see how they shape the mechanics within various gaming experiences, whether they be tabletop adventures, board games, or digital games. So, let's dig in. Crowe, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me yet again.
You're not part of the two-timer club. There's only a few of you.
Oh, yeah.
But I had to have you come back because I know you were in the narrative department with me, and I know you're a writer, but you're like me. You're a designer at heart and then a writer on top of that. But designer is the core, especially with the love for mechanics. So today, we're going to dig into 4 more of the lenses because I'm working my way through the art of game design. I may have missed a week or two there because life got weird, but we're going to pick it back up. Oh, boy, does it. We're going to pick her back up and keep chugging along, so thank you for bearing with me, everybody. Today, we're going to tackle the lens of actions, the lens of goals, the lens of rules, and the lens of skill, because these 4 can be used together to really attack mechanics, the gameplay loop, the mechanics that are going into digital game, board game, tabletop, card game. It kind of applies to all of them. So, before we dig in, I do like to set the stage with, who is Crowe? Crowe's my buddy. Crowe's the coolest. But people who have not heard about Crowe before and don't want to go back and listen to the previous, give us a Cole's note of how you fell in love with gaming, how you fell in love with writing, what you've done to get to where you are today, what you're up to these days, the origin story. You've been here,
Yeah, I'm a narrative designer as well as community manager now and content creator over on twitch.tv/hexobless. So, as with pretty much, I think, everyone who answers this question, I've been playing games since I was very little. And I first learned that you could kind of do it for a living in high school. And I was like, dang, that's awesome. So I took a class called Senior Project. I made a really bad RPG Maker demo because I didn't even make a full thing. And people played it. They loved it. My teacher got exploded by a piano and he was like, did I just die? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, that's awesome. And everyone laughter and just seeing someone enjoy something that I had created, especially I created it in a week. I had a whole year to do it. I did it in a week. Let's be real. And just seeing the joy, I was like, oh man, if I actually put work into this, excellent. And so that's kind of that's the origin story. I haven't looked back since. It's been 10 years since then? 8 years since then?
You studied game design in secondary as well, correct? Yes.
I went to college for game design. So yeah, high school was like, I'm going to do this. Went to college for game design at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore and got my degree. And here we are.
Right on.
Took
Fantastic.
Narrative department masterclass last year and masterclass 2 this past winter. So here we are.
All right. Okay, well, let's dig into the lenses. That we now know who Crowe is. So let's start off here with the lens of action. So let's start broad. In your opinion, how do actions within a game shape the player's experience? And what techniques can we as designers use to ensure that the actions are intuitive but also engaging? So kind of a broad spectrum here.
Throughout any sort of play, right? Games are essentially structured play, and they're structured in what actions can you take. So with any type of game, even if it's a tabletop game, digital game, whatever, the actions that are available to you are how you interact with the game. And so that is your direct link to whatever system, whatever experience you're interacting with. That's your wheelhouse.
Right. Very cool. Okay, so taking that into mind, in your opinion, how do like really well designed actions, how do they affect the flow of the gameplay? How do they enhance it? How can bad actions, badly chosen or badly designed actions impact the enjoyment or the overall flow and rhythm of a game?
Yeah, I think the key word there is rhythm. I think when an action is good, it kind of makes sense. And this can change depending on how familiar you are with games, because there are games that have overlapping actions, so it's easier if you have the like know-how. But ultimately, when you were playing as a child, you were running around playing tag or whatever, you don't think about what's my move here? What action am I going to do? You just play.
Right.
And so the closest you can get to, I think of something, I want to do something, I'm going to do it, and then the game allows you to do it, then you can reach that flow, you can reach that rhythm. What makes sense in this system here? And so when something is designed in a way that hits that wall and like stops you from being able to do what you want, or I'm trying to think of some like specific examples in the back of my head, but if something like gets in your way and or is frustrating, that can maybe mean that the action isn't correct for the play you're trying to achieve.
Right. So do you think, we've talked about the story stack and the player fantasy, the choice of actions for a specific game, regardless of the format or medium, how much does the player fantasy come into consideration when you're choosing actions, designing actions, picking which ones stay in, come out during playtesting?
Personally, I think it should be pretty much always in mind, because if you have a specific player fantasy, which give me a player fantasy.
Archaeologist in a Cthulhu mythos world, going through an old ruins. There's a player fantasy.
So what if one of your actions was something completely just out of left field? Like, I mean, you can always mix this up and make this fun with Cthulhu-based stuff, but like hacking. Like you're hacking into a computer. There's some disconnect there. You can make it work. You can always make something work if you try hard again, get the feeling of the action in there, right? But it's not what you jump to, and players won't jump to it. And so there's the disconnect with the player fantasy that goes, okay, either how do we make it match the player fantasy? How do we make it make sense in this? How do we make a hacking like virtual reality thing feel like archaeology with Cthulhu and like all of that?
Sounds like fun now.
Yeah. Or why have it if it's not going to match that player fantasy? Because it's only going to throw people for a loop, and people they're not gonna get it, you know?
Yeah, that makes total sense. You're like throwing ice skating into World of Warcraft. Why? What about feedback? Like gameplay feedback for actions, because doesn't that helps establish the rhythm and the flow as well, right? If you're getting a strong feedback at the right timing, that helps as well for the actions, correct?
Yeah. Feedback is actually something that's very important in design in general, because if you press a button and nothing happens, or visually you don't see anything happen, you're gonna be like, oh, it doesn't do anything. And so you want the feedback of your actions to make it very, very clear what's going on and have it be rad as hell. And again, like all encompassing with the player fantasy. Mm-hmm. And I think that a good example of this is reaction speed in games. How quickly does something happen once you set it in motion? I'm thinking like you have your stealth action like Metal Gear Solid.
Right.
right? Where you're sneaking around. You can shoot guns, but like you're being very calculating.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have like a first person shooter kind of thing, like
Right.
Destiny 2 or Splatoon, where it's fast paced, you're fighting each other, but you're still like the action is the same, picking up a gun and shooting it.
Yeah.
But the point of it is different.
But what about tabletop? Like tabletop actions in a role-playing game in Dungeons & Dragons, Blades in the Dark. As a designer, and this is something I've been struggling with a lot lately, is how do you create... Like Blades in the Dark does an excellent job of delineating exactly when you should open it to your player and say, okay, this is a moment where I'm going to give you the option of taking an action, and I'm going to tell you what the risk is, and then the player has feedback into that whole process, versus D&D where player says, I'm going to do this, DM says, here's the difficulty, and away you go. When it comes to those kinds of actions, what are some of the key design considerations?
So Blades in the Dark and D&D are so very interesting because D&D, you really get very granular and in the weeds with it, right? Or at least that's what I do. But like a turn is 6 seconds. You're spending like so long thinking about these minor details, whereas Blades in the Dark is very cinematic. You're like, okay, all of this holds down on like one roll. You do the roll, partial success, go to the next, like we're going on. And so those actions carry a different amount of weight to them. And even in D&D, you can play with the tension, you can play with the pacing, saying like players will often like try to like have multiple chances for things. And sometimes it's more fun to let them, I'm digressing. In D&D, the getting into the weeds of it, like you're stealthing through a labyrinth, there's guards, back to the stealth action mindset. You're trying to open a door and it's locked. You try to pick the lock. You fail. Someone else in the player is like, oh, let me try. They fail. The barbarian's like, let me just fucking knock it down, right? Pardon my French.
No, that's right ahead.
Like succeeds, it's very loud, whatever. Like things are happening so minutely. Whereas in Blades of the Dark, you're like, okay, you come across a door, it's locked. You roll to unlock it, you fail. Guards come in. Or even a partial success, you open the door, guards are around the corner. And so those actions, especially with the partial success, the failing forward idea, you will constantly have things moving along, whereas D&D does not have actions that necessarily move things along.
Well, let's put a pin in the lens of actions, because we could keep going forever and ever, because that really is a whole topic. But let's look at the next one, the lens of goals. So when you've got the action set aside, what role do goals play in driving that player engagement, and how do you design in goals that are both clear and compelling into the game?
This is relevant to I think I gave last time in regards to sandbox versus railroading.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right? So if you're playing a tabletop role-playing game, but really this goes for any game, if the players don't know what to do, like they have nothing to interact with, they have no vision, you have to give them something to aim for, or else they're just going to be like, what's the point? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
What's going on? So that's the purpose goals have. It gives it structure. It gives your players something to aim for when they don't have their own thing. Someone can go into like Destiny 2 and there's like specific goals to do, but you can also just go mess around and have some fun on your own. That's up to the player. A player is always going to have that choice, but you want to have those goals in case they're like, I don't know what to do.
But to go back to tabletop as a GM, because fellow GM, world builder, game creator, it's also kind of handy, isn't it, to plant hooks all over the place, to put in things that a player could pick up and say, this is mine, I want to pursue this, I want to find this artifact, or I want to become the leader of this faction, or something they dream up, and then you grab a hold of it. That's also a consideration, correct? At least in tabletop.
Yes, I think as a GM, part of your job is to be on the lookout for little things that you're like, ooh, my player is really going to be interested in this sort of hook. So let me just like worm it in there on the side to see if they notice it and grab on. But then also, like in my own game, my own weekly game right now, their goal is pretty much just to find allies for this plot that's happening in a city back home where a vampire is trying to get in and take power of and take control of this city. And they're not, they ran away from that. They were not ready to handle that. And so they're like, we have to find allies. We have to find people.
Right.
So that's their goal right now, is just find people. But then I'm introducing these characters that have their own lives and their own place in the world, which are filled with hooks for later on, for things to mess around with. Little hints and foreshadowing for some character development that is going to go on for the players later down the line. Just really like populating the world with, there are things going on. And if you want to figure out more, it's there for you. And finding that balance is very fun and exciting as a GM.
Yeah, very cool. In a digital game where it's much more linear and a player is kind of led along, like in a Metroidvania game or a roguelike, again, you have very specific goals. You're going to get an item, or you're going to finish a level or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But they evolve over time, whether you unlock more areas because you get more tools that allow you to do more things, or whether you progress the storyline. What are your thoughts on the evolution of goals throughout a digital game where it's much more linear? No, I'm not talking branching narrative games. I'm talking something a little more linear.
Yeah, I think that I personally really love it when something starts out very simple, like Save the Princess, Legend of Zelda, right? Save the Princess. And that's the thoroughfare throughout the entire thing, but you're not just going to save the princess. There's things that get in your way, and there's nuances that can creep up, distancing away from Legend of Zelda as a whole. But like when you have a plot that is linear, I love it when people have things that start to tie in where you're like, this doesn't seem like it's relevant, and then it is.
Mm-hmm.
And you needed to do that, actually. It helped you immensely. And you can just weave in this like complex, nuanced plot that started out from a very simple, very relatable, I'm a character that needs to get this done.
Yeah, I love that too. What are your thoughts? Do you play like open world survival games like Conan Exiles or Minecraft or Valheim or Enshrouded?
The Long
or
Dark?
The Long Dark. The Long Dark's very narrative. Like the Long Dark has a lot of weenies, a lot of goals, but something like Minecraft, even a lot of the other ones have. But let's pick Minecraft. I'm sure you've played Minecraft.
I have.
Games like that, you're not at least back in the old days, you weren't handed a goal. You just made up your goals. Like there was nothing there to actually drive and lead you, apart from exploration, discovery, and invention. In those kind of situations, do you think that's a shortfall? Do you think that's a strength of the game? Like, where do you stand on that?
I think that specifically thinking about the like open world survival crafting kind of stuff, that's not going to be for everyone. Like that's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. For me, I love doing that, especially with friends. As a multiplayer experience, kind of going in and I just last week started playing Valheim for the first time with my good friend and frequent collaborator, Damon, my fellow corrupted blood brother, which I don't know if I've told you about, but
We'll have to later.
yeah, I'll explain. We just started playing Valheim for the first time, and Valheim has goals. It has, like, you go hunt down the special guys. I haven't played that much of it.
But there is space for you to create your own goals too. Like,
yeah, like I want to create like a cool, fun, like, home base, you know.
Yeah.
And there's always stuff to do. You like surviving, you're crafting, your raft. We played Raft together.
Oh yeah.
Before the story and after. Love that game. And it's just a fun collaborative experience. And so no matter what the goal is of the game, I feel like people who like collaborative experiences love survival crafting, like open world stuff.
As a designer, applying a design mindset to that kind of game, coming and creating a game like that, how do you do that? How do you create space, in your opinion, to allow people to create emergent goals?
I think, especially with the crafting survival stuff, it's having a very clean systems of like survival or crafting, resource gathering, making sure resources are not too available but not too sparse. There's a lot of balancing that needs to get done, and a game feel is such an important thing for crafting those kinds of experiences, because that's essentially all that is there. If there's no narrative alongside it, which can help make, like, if you have a system that's a little bit less clean and fun, feels a little less nice. If the, like, story or the environment is, like, beautiful and fun enough, it can balance that out. But making a game that just feels nice to play, like it's just simple and clean. Like Minecraft, people love Minecraft because it's so simple.
Yeah.
And just as, like, you just go in there. If you're like me, you dig straight down for like 10 minutes. You try to get back up. Like, it's just, you can do whatever, and it's simple and it's clean, and you can then build out complexities from that.
Well, that's the power of goals then, and the consideration of goals in the designing of a game. Let's move on to the lens of rules. So, we have the actions with mechanics. We have the goals, what's driving the character, whether they're in the game or whether they're emergent. So, around that space, we put up fences of rules. So how do the game rules, again, digital tabletop board card, how do those game rules establish the framework? And this may feel like an obvious one. We're talking about the sacred circle, the magic circle, whatever you want to talk about here. But how do those game rules establish the framework for player interaction? How do those principles guide the designers in creating those rules? Because you're trying to create community or depth or meaningful choices or a meaningful experience. So what considerations do you have?
So rules give you the structure in which you are making actions to then go towards your goals, right? Without the rules, then there is no constraints. And rules inherently give constraints because you have to act and exist within the confines of the rules.
Right.
And in those constraints, confines, within those constraints is where you can start to have those ideas. Okay, what can I do with these constraints? I think that's something common in art in general, is limiting your resources can then get your brain churning into what is actually available with these. What can I do with this? Instead of you have everything at your fingertips. So anything is possible. And so by creating the framework with the rules, you can then start to get creative with what is possible with these constraints.
Okay, so a couple things come into my brain when we move on down this one. First of all, flexibility versus rigidity, because you mentioned D&D versus Blade in the Dark. I would take it further. Let's say Pathfinder versus Blade in the Dark. Pathfinder, very rigid, very set in stone. Here's very specific rules with all kinds of variations. Blades in the Dark, narrative games of similar vein, are much more open.
Loosey-goosey.
What is the consideration there, and how does that impact not only the game, but like the theme, the world, the experience in general?
There was this really interesting thread I was reading where, because there's the rule of cool, right? Which the rule of cool is basically, if you don't like the rules, you can throw them out. You can get rid of them. Ultimately, the players have ultimate control. No rules on a piece of paper saying, hey, you can't do that is going to stop you from doing it if you really want, right? And there's this thread that was really interesting where if you write in your rules, you can ignore these rules, then it completely like throws any sort of like respect for the system out the window. Oh. Which I thought was very interesting because I love the rule of cool. As someone who plays D&D and runs D&D very broken, like just very like just ripping out the guts and replacing them in however I want. I love the idea of like, if you want to mess with it, mess with it. The designer in me is like, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it was very interesting, this idea of, you don't want to state it though. You don't want to say, here are the rules, do like, here's rule 1, do this, rule 2, do that. Rule 3, ignore rule 1 and 2. Because that creates a framework of none of this matters.
Right.
And you want to take yourself more seriously with that, with the game, with the rules.
Do you think there's a consideration there that the average person doesn't have the experience, the training, they haven't played with systems enough where they're at the point where they can say, okay, this is the system, but I know I can tweak things. But they look at a system and then it's like you get in a car and you say, okay, I know that this car is going to keep going, but one of the tires might fall off.
Yeah. You can, of course, completely alter the course of the game rules. However, they are there for a reason, and if you don't know what you're doing, if you get rid of a vital rule that completely unbalances the game, you can ruin the experience, and then you blame the game.
Yeah. You'll have players who will say, I want to tweak this, or can we change that, or can you pull that rule out? And they don't always understand that removing that rule changes the balance of this thing, which changes the balance of this much bigger thing, and suddenly it's much harder to keep a balanced experience for everyone. It might be more fun for you, but everybody else is not going to have as much fun. So that's the importance of those rules holding that structure for the group.
Yeah. This is a slight tangent. I think that's one of the reasons why D&D 5e Mystic doesn't really exist. If you're not familiar with a Mystic, it's a class that has been talked about a lot in regards to being overpowered, and pretty much it's not in any official source book. It was there was a Unearthed Arcana for it. Mm-hmm. That's the most recent like play testable version, but there's still no official thing because it can break the rules. It can break the system. There are mechanics built in. I love it. I think it's a fantastic class because it's so flexible. Yeah. The idea of it is you have these different it's psionics based, so it's a lot of like mind stuff going on. And it's been a while since I've read them, so the rules are a little rusty in my head, but the essential core of it was there was different types of mystic you could be. You could mix and match from these like essentially houses of these like abilities. And you could be a tank. You could be a glass cannon. You could be a healer. You could do anything with the mystic class. It was so flexible. The problem is that a lot of their abilities also was about foresight, seeing the future, and or like changing things in such a way that as a GM, if you had a mystic in your party, you had something prepared, they could go, no, I can find out this thing that you've been keeping secret because I can read minds and see when people are lying and do all these things. So that was that issue from the GM side. But then mystics, because they're so flexible, could overlap with any other class in regards to, oh, you're a rogue? Well, I can turn myself invisible at will because I have this specific mystic trait. And then also, like, a mystic could, like, oh, and, or I'm a tank and I can, like, take all this damage. And you can kind of just overtake a role in the party and be just better than any other class. So that's why it, like, doesn't exist. And that's why people don't really allow it. But it's such a flexible class. It's so interesting.
I think it's important to have those tools for when there's something missing in a party. But I am one of those people who hate the spell knock, just because if there's a rogue in the party and the wizard can just open all the doors, like...
Yeah, and that's why knock makes, like, such a big noise, right? But...
not back in the day.
Yeah. Like, that's from playtesting, because you're like, oh, this isn't fun.
Right. But that's part of the importance of rules, is what we're kind of digging at here, is...
Exactly.
Rules can often seem like they're strict and they're there for no reason, but in fact, they're enhancing fun. They're providing a space for the fun to take place inside of.
You don't want to overlap what makes something fun. If you're having fun, if you're just, like, closed-minded, you're playing a collaborative experience in tabletop.
We're tabletop here, yeah.
Like, you're playing a collaborative experience. If you are like, well, I'm having a blast because I'm very powerful and I can do whatever I want, and you're like, oh, well, I'm the one who does these things, then if another player also is very good at doing those things, you have to, like, have that back and forth. You have to share. You have to collaborate.
Yeah.
And so the rules are there to facilitate that. And as a GM who is in charge of the rules, it's important to keep those things in mind and make sure that everyone is on an equal playing field.
Amen. It's funny you mentioned the Mystic class, the ability to know things and throw off plans. Blades in the Dark has that built right into class features. Like, if there's class features where you can look at the GM and say, tell me something that's secret, and they have to tell you. Like, it's hilarious.
Yeah, and Blades in the Dark is built for that, right? Since it's so fast-paced, you can't, like, if you were like, oh yeah, I know this, then you run with it, you roll with it, right?
Yeah. It's much more collaborative, too. It's not the GM creating a story that everybody's adding to. It's we're all equal partners creating a story together, which I love. It's a blast. So cool.
It's great. It's a good time.
Okay, that's rules, the framework that allows us to create this fun experience. All right, the last one. So we've got actions, we've got goals, we've got rules. Player skill. How well are you at those actions and chasing your goals inside of the rule set? So, in your opinion, when considering player skill levels, how does a designer ensure that the mechanics that we've already touched on accommodate people both at the beginning end of the spectrum and people who've been playing for a long time and are experts? And for this one, let's dial back to digital because it's a little more granular and easier to nail this. But
it's definitely the trickiest thing, I think, when it comes to game design, is the balancing aspect. And this is slight tangent. This is what the importance of playtesting is, because there's this rule that isn't always the case, but basically, if you make the game, you will probably be the best at the game. Even just from the amount of times you play test it yourself, the, like, intricacies of all the systems, you know how they work literally from the ground up to their core. This isn't always true, but
yeah,
there is something there. You can kind of, like, forget the beginner in there. And you're like, oh, this is the intended experience. Like, I want this to be hard. But then if someone is coming to it blind, doesn't know these systems you've made, doesn't know the intricacies of the game design, they could look at it, be like, this is not fun because I can't understand it, and then they don't approach it. And there's a big discussion always, this is probably never going to go away, about whether or not that's okay.
Right.
And that's where you get like difficulty levels in games. There's a trend I've seen, especially in big like RPGs like Final Fantasy 16 or 15, where they'll give you an item to equip to make things easier if you'd like, or you get more XP, or you just do more damage, more attack. I know Final Fantasy 15 had that for sure. That's something I've seen relatively frequently in the RPG space. And then in Baldur's Gate, you have the like story mode versus tactician mode,
right,
versus the in-between. And I think that those are probably the best way to handle it that we have. Just tweak the numbers or the AI so that the game interacts with the player a little bit more friendly or a little bit less friendly, so that people can tailor the experience. But it's not the perfect solution. I think it's what we have, and I think it works fine. But I'm always someone who's like, but I want to do the hard game. I want to do the hard game mode. And then I get in there and I'm like, actually, I just kind of want to know the story. So you see systems where you can change that mid-game too now, which is nice. It's a complicated area of conversation.
But it sounds like playtesting really is maybe not the cure-all, but it is definitely the place to start, is make sure you're testing and measuring.
From all different skill levels, yes. Like, even if, especially if you can get people to play test something who've never touched a game before. You can learn a lot by watching people who have never touched a game before play your game.
Could you imagine the early playtests on something like Dark Souls or Escape from Tarkov, where they're brutally hard even now after all the playtesting and the tweaking over the years?
Yeah.
But there's people who like that, so.
Yeah, and again, like, you're never gonna please every type of player.
You shouldn't try. No.
There's no point in it. You find a player fantasy, you find your market, your niche,
yeah,
and you make something that those people will love.
Including the skill level. Cool.
And then I want Animal Crossing hard mode. I think that would be awesome.
Right on. Well, I think that kind of kills the lenses. So let's bring the lenses to a close here, as we're getting close to running out of time here. And just to kind of bring it all together, in your opinion, how do the mechanics that are influenced by these 4 lenses we just talked about, how do they collectively shape the player experience? What insights can a game designer glean from understanding the interplay between these 4 lenses?
Game design is, at its core, designing systems of play. And systems have features of them that are so interconnected. And these are the things that are interconnected. Actions are how you interact with the space. As a player, how do you play the game? What are you doing? Literally the action of the character or whatever. To reach what goal? So you have a reason to do those actions. The rules give you the framework in which you are allowed to do certain actions. And then the skill level will be what is possible for different players use these actions to complete these goals. And so it's all interconnected, and you have to consider all of these different pieces, because if you ignore one, then you can very quickly start to falter in that area. And then your entire experience, because it's so interconnected, will start to tip and fall, and you'll have a lot of problems start to crop up, especially in playtesting. And then you'll have to backtrack and try to fix these problems. But if you consider them to start out, it's a lot easier.
But that's all part of the fun of game design, right? You come up with an experience you want to create, you create these things, and then it's like, well, if I twist this rule, how does that impact the action they're taking? Can they achieve their goal? Does it make it harder skill level or easier skill level? If I want to up to skill level, which do I change? A rule, an action, a goal? Like, so those four, they all feed off each other.
They all feed off each other, and they all are so fun to mess with.
Yeah, I have spent far too many hours just sitting around playing with the system just to see what it does. But yeah, there you go. Those four lenses are an excellent way to approach a system, especially tabletop. I think they're perfect for tabletop. Like, that's how you break apart a system and think about it. So
yeah, and I think video games too.
Yeah, I'm on a tabletop kick these days. Yeah, those two.
Yeah, all right.
Well, that's it for the core stuff. That was fun. Let's do the fun stuff, the other stuff. Now, you've been on before, so you've previously answered my core question, my philosophical question at the heart. But I'm curious, have you thought about it in passing since then? Do you have new answers? And to reiterate, in my opinion, there exists a magical space at the intersection of obviously the corner of story and game, but also novelists, board games, comic books, improv, comedy, movies, all of these things where we can all get together, hang out. There's a shared language, a special fellowship where we just get along. If you agree with me, and not everybody does, but if you agree with me, what is the magical thread that holds all this together?
I believe last time I talked about the magic circle, my beloved magic circle. I do think I have been thinking a lot about storytelling in general lately, and how there is so much that comes from storytelling that reaches every medium: language, art, games, movies, like anything. You can kind of craft a narrative, and I think we're to quote Susan O'Connor, we are hardwired for story. And I really think that's true. I think that there is a beauty in the story, and even just simple actions can weave themselves into this grand tapestry that is the story of life. And it's fun to kind of see where those threads overlap. And I think that with games especially, you can kind of see into the to continue the tapestry metaphor, you can see the weave a little bit easier, and you can start to like pluck at it and just get to some sort of like human core, like human center, like the soul.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been on my mind lately.
You're a philosopher, buddy. I love it. That's good. That's a good answer. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
I think too much, maybe.
No. All right. Let's do the quick fire, and then I will push you out the door into the cold, dark night.
Go brr.
So, what are you currently playing?
Hades 2, early access. Oh boy, you know it. If
It's good.
Super Giant does anything, I'm there.
What are you reading right now?
Nothing of substance. I've been reading these social media AU fan fiction type things where it's like fake Twitter accounts for characters talking to each other. There's drama, and it's fun and quick.
Interesting. Good way to learn a little bit of dialogue, maybe some barks. Mm-hmm. What do you listen to when you write?
I make character playlists. I listen to a lot of various kinds of music, but usually when I'm working, I will just put on one of my character playlists and just listen to that. It helps me get into like a certain headspace depending on the character. And it's a lot of fun.
Okay, if your essence was distilled down perfectly and translated into a tabletop role-playing game, what system or world would you be in, and what race and class would you be?
So this one's a tricky one. I do think I have to go with D&D just because I know it so well, but I don't think that would be the best one. I will put on the record, that's just the one I know the most.
Okay.
As for race and class, half elf, and according to all of the which D&D class quizzes are you, I would be a paladin, but I think that's false. And it's just wrong, and I would be a wizard.
You're multi-class.
I'm not a paladin. It always gives me paladin, and I know why. It's because I always pick the friendship and loyalty answers because I'm very loyal and I love my friends. But I'm not a paladin.
Well, my friend, it is time for us to start heading towards the door. First of all, I'd like to open a little space. Is there anything that you're working on or have worked on it recently that you'd like to mention, boost, promote, send people to your Twitch channel, that kind of thing? Hit me with it.
Yes, I stream usually 3 times a week on twitch.tv/hex_noblesse. I have some really fun things I'm working on in terms of making it a more polished and fancy experience. I have a little character to showcase and become. It's going to be fun. As well as some fun things behind the scenes that I will not say just yet. But making some games.
That's exciting.
They're going to be cool.
That's all we get to know. That's it.
For now.
You'll come tell me later. All right, well, in that case, it is time for me to close up shop, but I would love to give you the last word. Any parting words of wisdom while I push you out the door?
There is so much beauty in this world. Wherever you look. There's a lot of bad, a lot of awful, but man, is there beauty in this world. And I just love it. And I hope everyone can find the beauty within their world as well.
Well, as we dock here at the end of our Odyssey, I want to thank Crowe once again for illuminating the pathways of game design with me. And as always, to you, dear listener, thank you for taking your spot at the table. Until we meet again, remember, keep exploring, creating, and sharing stories with the world. Stay safe out there, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the corner of Story and Game.